Hello and welcome back to the Ideal Wealth Grower YouTube channel. My name is Axel Meyerhöfer. I'm the founder of Ideal Wealth Grower and your host for today's episode. And today the video is probably going to be a little shorter for a Friday video, but I still thought it should be recorded and I want to actually share the information and my opinion about it with you, our audience. And what I'm talking about is I saw an interesting article today that I did a little bit additional research on that was actually looking at how are we looking at our accomplishments, at our achievements when it comes to where are we financially. And a lot of people say, well, how much are you worth? What's your wealth? And when it comes to evaluating how wealthy somebody is or how much wealth has been accumulated, there are different ways on looking at that. One of the common things is to say, okay, well, so how much do I have in my retirement accounts if you've been working all your life, or you have been working for at least a long time, like your 401k or your IRA and those kind of accounts. And the hope is that these accounts have been performing really well and will not really get into any kind of negative situation by the time that you plan to retire. The other aspect to look at is Social Security, because there is, and I really hate that term, I don't like it to be called an entitlement program, but the word entitled means you did something that gave you the right to get something back. So if you have been working as an employee all your life, or most of your life, actually the minimum that you need to do is 40 months of your life, and pay into the Social Security Trust Fund, then that's your contribution, and that earned you and entitled you to get something back, which we call Social Security. And you can go on the Social Security website, ssa.gov, and put in the retirement planner, and the first thing it checks is, do you have your 40 months total together? Let's assume you do, or even more than that. Then it shows you for every year how much have you actually contributed to Social Security, and then it shows you a calculator that says, okay, if you ask to receive Social Security at the earliest possible moment, here's the monthly amount. If you wait till the standard retirement age, here's your amount. And you can these days even say, I'm delaying even beyond the standard. I think if you're delaying until you're 70 or something like that, they gave you basically a bonus. The way this works is they say, okay, standard is 100%. If you want anything earlier, you become eligible at 59 and a half. So theoretically, as soon as you turn 59 and a half or 60, you could say, I want my Social Security. But then they go from the standard 100% and deduct a certain percentage. And nowadays, it's also possible to say, well, if the standard is 100, let's say the standard for you in your contributions would be $1,500 a month. If you wait another 2, 3, 4 years, then they give you basically extra. But you also have to keep in mind and make a calculation, well, during those years I'm getting nothing, so is it really worth the extra? And it depends, how fit do you think? If you say I wait till 70 and I don't feel that well, I don't think I'm going to make it much beyond 80, then that might not be the smartest. If you feel strong and you say, hey, I'm going to make it 100 and beyond, and you're going to collect 30 years Social Security with a bonus, maybe you want to go for that. Now, for a lot of people, that might sound like, well, I'm not even caring about that because I'm working age, I'm in my 30s, 40s, maybe early 50s, and this is so far away for me in the future. Now, the other aspect that why I'm bringing this up is when we're looking at what's your wealth or what do you have that can contribute to your retirement, one of the really important aspects of that is what have you done, what have you accumulated to do? And what people typically say is, how many assets have you been able to create? Right? Have you bought stocks? Have you bought gold coins? Have you bought Bitcoin? Have you bought properties like we recommend, residential real estate that pays you positive cash flow? And it's not only how much does it pay you, but it's also how much is it worth. And so typically when somebody is discussing what's the value of my wealth, or how much have I actually accumulated and how much will this money last? Now, the first variable for how much and how long will this money last is always how long do you think you want to need it or take it. And in this article that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I really thought it was a pretty smart and interesting way, because we not typically look at it really through the lens of time. We typically look at it through the lens of dollars. Right? Do you have $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, and so forth? And so the author of this article was elaborating and looking at how should we actually look at it. And I think he had a really great point. So here's an example to illustrate what that point is and why time is most likely more important than the number. You know, before I go into this, that we are always, and I am always talking about the time freedom point. But that comes from the fact that we typically throughout our life exchanging time for money. And then we do something with the money. We can buy groceries with the money, we can buy cars, we can buy gas, we can buy gifts, and we can invest some of this money. And so my suggestion is, when you have exchanged and are exchanging time for money, invest it in something where that money can work for you, right? So if you take our typical example and say, okay, I take money and put it aside, I put, let's say, $1,500 aside every month. And I do that throughout the whole pandemic that is going on now, depending on how you're counting, let's say 20 months, 18 to 20 months. If you did that, you would have somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000, and that would be enough right now to buy your first investment property for anywhere between $100,000 and $150,000, depending on interest rates and a few other variables. And that property would not only have that value of, let's say, $125,000 to make right in the middle, but it also would generate positive cash flow. At the very beginning, it might only be $100 or $200 a month, and as you keep owning it, the rent keeps increasing while your costs remain the same. And so in the third year, you may have $250. In 5 years, you may have $350. In 7 years, you might have $500 a month of positive cash flow. And so my point about the time freedom point is, if you keep doing this, if you keep taking this money out of your exchange of time for money and put some of it aside, so every so many years, let's say every other year, you can buy one of those properties, you can see that the amount of money that accumulates each month gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And let's say you needed something like $4,000 a month for everything that you need, for your car, for your house, for your rent, for your food, for all the things that you do, insurance, what have you, $4,000 a month. Right? So as you keep investing into these properties, you get closer and closer and closer to this $4,000 a month point. Now, you might still, from your employment, have a retirement fund. You might still be, and will most likely be, eligible for Social Security. But whether you count that in or not, ultimately there will be a certain amount of money that is coming into your door, mainly from this source of investment that you did. That means you have reached your time freedom point, hopefully well before you reach retirement age, so you do no longer have to exchange time for money. You're making your $4,000 income or more, and it's only going to get better from there, because your properties are still there. You will probably still be able to increase the rent every so often, and might even be able to add 1 or 2 more properties over time if you decide, I'm not just quitting my job, I just do half time or still work for a little while, whatever your decision might be. So in either case, on our path to the time freedom point, normally when people have been looking at where are we have said, okay, I have 5 properties, each is $100,000 worth, so that's $500,000 in value. I have my own house, let's say that's $300,000, so that's $800,000 total. Then I invested in some stocks, and I invested in some Bitcoin, I invested in some gold and some other stuff, and at some point you might reach a point to say, okay, now I have $1 million in assets. Now, I always say you shouldn't really count your own property that you're living in unless it's free and clear into that, especially because it's hard or not that easy to get to this money. But just for the calculation of what is your wealth, what is basically the amount of money that you have theoretically available to you. And normally we look at that number and then we kind of estimate, well, how is this going to work out, and how long will my money last into the future if I were to say I retire today. Now, if you do what we recommend and invest in residential real estate, then this passive income will continue as long as you hold the properties, and keep it in good shape, which is why we're saying you should actually hold them with turnkey providers, because they're going to manage it professionally all the time. When there is something to repair, they're going to repair it, and you build your reserves so that even when there's something bigger like a roof or an air conditioned system, water heater, anything like that, you have the money to put that into the property, kind of like reinvest, but not your own money, but money that you put aside from the rent that you collected over time. So all of that is basically a little better than somebody who does not do these investments, just has a retirement account and maybe a few savings in some other investments. But what is really the message here in this video today is to really make time the more important aspect. Because as I said, when you have the mindset to look for the time freedom point, that requires you to say, how much is the income that I really need to make per year and per month so that I can actually quit my job? And when we go with a $4,000 a month example, that is right around, that would be exactly $48,000 a year. Give it a little Christmas bonus, $50,000 a year to cover all your expenses, right? So if that's your reality and you had taken everything together like we were discussing earlier, and it adds up to $1 million, then the real question is, if you quit and do nothing anymore just on $1 million, whether you do the investments we do or you got your hands on $1 million worth of assets in a different way, instead of saying, well, how long will $1 million last? It's much more, how much do you spend per year? So if you honestly know you spend $50,000 a year, then that $1 million, if you never do anything, it never increases in anything, costs wouldn't increase. So keeping all the variables otherwise outside, it would last you 20 years. If on the other hand, you find out, whether you invested or not, that you have a lifestyle that costs $100,000 a year, then it only lasts you 10 years. And if it's $200,000 a year, then it lasts you 5 years. So what I want to get across, and what I really thought was a great way to make it really understandable, is two things from this article. Number one, we should really use the lens of time to figure out how much do I need, how much have I accumulated, especially when you're not just looking through the lens of how many things have you, or how much money have you invested in cash flowing properties, but in other areas as well, and how have they performed, so that you can convert it in how many years will it last me at a lifestyle of X amount of dollars per month, per year or per month. So time in that sense is a really important variable. But the other part, the second part that I also want to point out, in this example, in this article, the author exclusively looked at somebody lives in a house, somebody has a job, somebody has a 401k retirement plan, somebody has an eligibility to Social Security, and maybe bought some gold and some stocks. And the whole idea of residential real estate investing like we do was not in the picture. And that makes a massive, massive difference. And here's why. If you think about it, if you do like we were just discussing, in every 2 years you have accumulated by putting money aside enough money as a down payment to buy these properties, and then over time you get to the point where you actually have $4,000 a month coming in. That income, you can almost take that out of the equation, because those $48,000 or $50,000, and that keeps increasing even beyond the time freedom point every month and every year as you increase the rents while your rest of your cost remains the same. That is secured income that is not dependent on the performance of your investments. Because if you say right now, when I'm looking, my house and my stock portfolio and my gold coins, just as an example, have X value. Let's even say it's $1 million. If in 6 months we have a massive stock market crash, and the prices for the stocks that your retirement planner or yourself have invested in go 50% down, which would be considered a significant crash, then your $1 million is suddenly $500,000, half. Which would also mean you could only last half as long with the money unless you would totally change your lifestyle. But with our passive income out of real estate, whether the stock market crashes or not, people will still need to live in houses. And it's not very likely that people move out. Actually, if you were to ask yourself, what would need to happen? What would be a horror scenario economically? Think about it. Horror scenario. The economy stops. All the shops are closed. all the manufacturing stops. Prices for raw materials go through the roof. More than 25 million people suddenly get unemployed. There is eviction moratoriums, all kinds of stuff. You know what you recognize? All those things happened during the pandemic, pretty much instantaneously within 2 or 3 months. And I can say if you work with really good out-of-state turnkey providers like we do, we did not miss any significant income through rent. And we had nobody, literally in all our properties, nobody moved out. Now you could argue that they didn't move out because they didn't really want to do a move while there's a COVID situation. But I think there's also a point to be made that they like the properties they are in because we have nicely renovated properties at fair prices. So if that situation, economy shut down, 25 million people unemployed, you can't even go to your job, jobs are hard to get, everything is closed and locked down, and people stay in our properties and pay our rent as they have the last 2 years, then that is a real litmus test to say this system works. The real aspect, and this is what I'm always a little ticked off about, is that you want to start as early as possible. Because it's one thing to put money aside and every 2 years or even sooner, if you can, buy another property and build your portfolio and increase your passive income and reach your time freedom point. But when you have taken a long time, like I have, to learn about all this stuff, really understanding it and then start investing. Yes, I have a nice portfolio and we are at our time freedom point now, but it took me way too long. It took me almost as long as going all the way to Social Security. So I beg you, if you hear this in your 20s, 30s, early 40s or mid 40s, please start right away. So you can be done way, way before me. Because it also changes the whole mindset and the whole understanding of life. If you know, no matter what happens to the economy, no matter what happens if there will ever be Social Security. If you're currently a millennial, I would say most of you and your peers would probably say, I don't really think there's going to be Social Security. And you're probably right. But if you work to your time freedom point through investments in out-of-state residential real estate like we recommend, it doesn't matter. Because you will have taken care of yourself and your family through your own investments, and they will pay for as long as you keep them and keep them in good shape, which is what we do and what we recommend. And that comes from working with really good turnkey providers. So if you do those things and you keep in mind that it's not a number, it's not how quickly can I get to 500,000, how quickly can I get to 1 million, can I reach 2 million, can I reach 5 million. The number itself only has relevance when you put it in context of time. That's why I have always said the time freedom point is a close and really detailed evaluation of what is likely the amount of money that you need every month and every year. And then you can shape your portfolio and your investments accordingly. But just pick a number like most people say and ask, and you see this on the social media all the time, I have 500,000 or I have $1 million, can I retire and how long will my money last? Is really only possible to answer when you have an idea of how much are you consuming. So ask yourself that, and then also, you can make a decision. Do you need to consume as much as you do? Do you want to consume as much as you do? Do you want to have more and consume more than you do right now? Or could you also potentially consume less? And what I always say is, if you can live with a little less now, you will make it up on the back end in 15 years and beyond easily, especially in the quality of life that you reach after that. So looking at what is the value of our assets, and in that sense also what is our own value in money terms, should, in my recommendation based on the article that I saw, much more be evaluated and looked at and discussed in the context of how much time does it give me without having to work and exchange time for money, rather than what's the number, what's the amount of money and how impressive is that amount of money. So I hope this was helpful. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love to ask you to subscribe, give it a thumbs up if you like this video, and most importantly, please share this video. And the last thing I want to say, you will see as one of the new things here on the YouTube channel and also on Spotify and Apple iTunes, we will start a podcast the Ideal Investor Show, where we actually talk about the path to early retirement. And I would love for one to ask you to watch the show, whether you listen to it as a podcast or you watch it as a video. But I would also like to ask you, for anybody who is a subscriber, for anybody who likes our channel, we will bring in really cool guests, and I would love for you to take a look, take a listen, and give it a chance and give us feedback so that I can make it better and better over time, and we can get better and better guests that you're really interested in to cover all the different topics that are coming out and that you would like to know about before you decide what you do with your money. So please share our channel, share our videos, and stay tuned for the podcast to come out. Until then, be well, stay safe, and I see you in the next video.